very much for being here. So I didn't mention, but this is a Devcon satellite event. So I would like to speak a little bit about Devcon. Devcon 1 was almost 10 years ago, and like 9 years ago, in the opening talk of in your talk that was about Ethereum in 30 minutes, it was called, you mentioned that Ethereum is an evolving ecosystem. Yeah. So how did Ethereum look like almost 10 years ago? What main differences are with today? And did you expect 10 years ago that Ethereum would look like it looks right now?
Well, so 10 years ago, Ethereum as a blockchain did not exist, right? 10 years ago, I think we were in, I believe, POC 7, and we had just had Devcon 0, which was this 45-person closed meeting of the Ethereum research and dev teams inside of our office in Waldemannstraße in Berlin. There were still a lot of very famous pictures from there, but it was at the time I think we had just approximately nailed down the structure that the Ethereum would have at launch. So all of the different pieces of how the proof of work chain, uncles, the details of the EVM, the opcodes. The one piece that I think we did not have yet was the ETH hash mining algorithm. The ETH hash mining algorithm I think we developed over the course of the fall. Actually, maybe it was finished by December, but it was just being audited in January, February, and March, but then changed a little bit. So at the time, the thinking behind Ethereum was basically Bitcoin plus smart contracts, right? And what's interesting, I think, is that in the 10 years since then, obviously the blockchain has changed a lot, right? We moved from proof of work to proof of stake. We started doing layer 2s, started doing blobs, a lot of new precompiles, a lot of cryptographic applications, ZK snarks completely changed everything. Account abstraction, a lot of changes in technology, but also the way that we think about Ethereum and the kinds of things that Ethereum gets used for. I think a lot of things are still the same, right? If you read the Ethereum white paper, what do you see there, right? You see stable coins, we have those. Financial derivatives, so that's called DeFi now, we have those. Then in insurance with oracles, we have that. Decentralized file storage, not many people use it, but that also exists. Prediction markets, that exists, very impressive job in 2024. Decentralized domain names, we have ENS. So a lot of things exist, like NFTs and meme coins definitely were not in the white paper. Please don't do those. You're only allowed to do things in the white paper. And this is a permissioned protocol. But no, there's a lot of things that also ended up, I think, surprising the community in positive ways. And the way that we think about the protocol, so there's the angle of saying this is Bitcoin plus smart contracts, and then there's also this different angle that actually Gavin Wood brought in, which is saying this is like free open source software plus a shared database, right? Because Gavin, he actually told me, he found Bitcoin boring, right? He was actually not a crypto person before Ethereum, and he had this very different way of looking at it, right? And from this perspective, he had this vision of enabling non-financial applications and combining Ethereum together with Whisper and Swarm and other kinds of peer-to-peer networks. And now we have IPFS, people use it. Whisper has become Waku. There's many projects that use it. We have Fileverse, so decentralized Google Docs actually exists. And so that's that different way of looking at and using Ethereum has also expanded quite a bit. And I think in general, it's a lot of the same ideas, but just in a lot more detail.
Great, thank you. So the other day on Tuesday at Crecimiento, you mentioned about that time you've been here in Argentina and tried to buy something with ETH on mainnet, and you had this issue with the gas congestion. Have you tried again? And what has changed on Ethereum to allow, or what has to change, or what has changed to allow people to stop using decentralized or centralized exchange and use mainnet to buy stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I here not yet, but I absolutely plan to before I leave. I know there's several shops that take crypto very close to here now. Yeah, I think like when I have, like historically, when I've had these experiences trying to use it for local payments, I think often like a few different things break, right? So one is like fees are high, but now we have layer 2 is fees are low, so that's good. 2 is sometimes the transaction takes like 5 or 10 minutes to confirm. Now after EIP 1559 usually gets included in 1 or 2 slots, that's good. 3, sometimes the internet breaks, right? And like usually people assume the internet works. Like no, the internet does not work. Like, look, so I have my phone here, right? And there's like internet, right? Now we're going to do a live experiment where I am going to go and I'm going to open up a new web page. Let's just open up ethereum.org and let's go. See, it's 25% loading, 27%, 28%, 75%. Still, you know, this thing's still not loaded yet. Keep going, keep going. See, a little bit. Okay, see now, right? But see, and then this was actually, I think, like pretty good. When I was up there, there was a period of like a few minutes where it didn't load, right? So in real life, the internet never works as well as advertised, right? And the nice thing about like traditional payment proof of point of sale is that like it requires the merchant to be connected, but not the consumer, right? And with crypto, there are ways to do this, right? Like very simple. You could have a wallet where the consumer can, if the consumer is offline, the wallet just automatically from on the consumer side generates a transaction, puts the transaction in the QR code, and the merchant can scan it, right? Or the merchant can absorb the transaction with NFC, right? Like these are things that you can do, right? And like I think there's still a lot of like little things around the user experience that I think like still can be optimized more, but like it definitely gets better, right? And I think it's also important to remember that the centralized things that we're competing with are also not that good, right? So like for example, credit cards, like often for me, like when you tap the credit card, the time between when you tap and the time when you know, it says aprobado is like often longer than an Ethereum slot, right? So, and then that's just like credit cards, right? Then international payments, of course, banking system sometimes takes a few days, sometimes takes weeks, right? So, you know, the experience is improving, and I think we definitely have to like step up as an ecosystem and keep pushing to the highest level of quality. But I also think you know, we should not give up. Like we absolutely can make crypto payments great, and they keep getting greater.
Great, thank you. So you mentioned that part of the gas fee solution was layer 2s. Layer 2s were a big topic also in Devcon. This discussion of last year about their interaction with layer 1, and if they were framed as parasitic to layer 1. What do you think about that frame, and how do you think that relationship, or how would you describe the relationship between layer 2s and layer 1?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like interesting the way the conversation went, right? Because if you remember what the discourse was like a year ago, the discourse was basically L1 is like this evil monopolistic thing that is charging rent, and L2s are like the you know, the oppressed lower classes, and they will revolt and they will decide to we will not pay rents to the L1 anymore. We will become sovereign chains, right? And then that was 1 year ago, and then now we're saying, oh, well, our layer 2 is parasitic, right? So I think, but the underlying challenge here is basically that the way the economics are currently set up, like it's, there isn't a long-term guarantee that it's not going to flip completely to one side or flip completely to the other side, right? Which is bad, right? And because I think what we want is we want like a stable position, right? We want a stable situation where it's clear that value will accrue to you know, like ETH and to the L1, and at the same time it's clear that L2s are not going to zero, and there's value in working on them, right? And I think you know, there definitely are different economic models that can try to do a better job there, right? And I mean, based rollups are one of these examples. Like native rollups are another one of these. Different kinds of sequencing strategies, and like a lot of things still can change in the L2 space, and like there's also different kinds of L2s, right? Like there's based rollups that basically are like really they're trying to scale Ethereum, and they're just trying to be Ethereum shards, like that's their point. And then on the other side, you have projects like Mega ETH that basically say, hey, we're centralized, we're hyperscale, we're proud of being centralized. The reason why you should trust us is because we have Ethereum behind us, and the decentralized Ethereum is providing security as by being there as a backup, right? And like that's a different approach, and that's like an approach where the L2 is like actually being very different and is like actually adding value, right? So, and then you have the entire spectrum in between, right? So you have things like optimism, arbitrary scroll, and there's like Polygon, and then the different versions of Polygon, then at some point the different plasma chains. So I think we will see different kinds of L2s. And I also think that not every L2 needs to be independently monetized as a coin, right? Because like a lot of these projects, they share a lot of the same software, right? And like for example, like I think it would be totally fine if L2s that have their own coins, they basically go and focus on being faster speed, hyperscale, a little more centralized, but like try to provide as much security, as much censorship resistance as possible, but like really try to compete with like New York Stock Exchange gaming, like all of those applications. And then like based rollups, they basically just get run as a public service, and the parameters for there are just set accrue value to ETH. Like I think that approach is also fine, right? And I think these are things that like every member of the community can have some influence over.
Amazing. Continuing with rollups. So another hot topic during Devcon was interoperability. You were in that famous panel during the Interop Forum where you discussed with other L2s about interoperability. So my question is, why would an L2 would be incentivized to go in that direction and not like one winner takes all, like the approach of, I don't know, Superchain, Orbit, Elastic Chain?
So there's a few answers, right? So one of them is that I think a lot of the things that we call L2 interoperability are actually wallet interoperability, right? So for example, if you think about chain-specific addresses, cross-chain intents, ERC-7683, like all of those light clients, all of that stuff, those things, they actually do not require L2s to change much or change anything, right? Like for it to be really decentralized, L2s have to put their configs on chain, but otherwise, not much, like nothing, right? Chain-specific addresses, nothing, right? And in those cases, like those are things that actually have to be standardized across wallets, because there are just ways of moving coins between and like addressing like accounts on individual L2s, right? So sometimes like actually the challenge is not even coordinating between L2s, the challenge is coordinating between wallets. And in that case, I mean, obviously there are lots of individual wallets, and like you could argue, well, they actually have the exact same incentives, and there's definitely some wallets that try to create like proprietary networks. I mean, one of my hopes is like those two ecosystems can help keep each other in check, because I think it's in the interest of L2s that keep like wallets as like open and standards based as possible, and that's in the interest of wallets to do the same to L2s. And in general, like I think it's definitely in the interest of smaller wallets and smaller L2s to standardize, and I mean even for the larger ones, right? I think like it's good to remember that there is a bigger game, right? Like if your view is that Ethereum is the universe, then like the best that you can do is you can conquer Ethereum, right? But I think over the last couple of years we've seen that that's not actually the game that's being played, right? And of course it's like kind of cliche to like talk about whether it's like Solana or XRP, or like Celestia or like newer chains, right? And like saying that's the competition, right? Though my view view is that I think there is an even like a much bigger and more important competition, which is just the centralized world, right? So over the last 2 years, AI has gotten much more powerful, and like if AI grows and no other technology direction grows, then I think the world will just by default become a super centralized place, right? Because the technologies for decentralized, like for the little guys to coordinate, don't get better. The big guy gets better. Well, of course, the big guy is just going to like stomp over all of the little guys, right? Or if you think about even centralized payment systems, right? Like within the U.S. and Europe, you have SEPA. SEPA keeps adding new countries. You have Fed now within the U.S. You have better and better bilateral payments, and like people in those countries, they primarily care about like what works well for themselves, and what works well for themselves is not necessarily like neutral or globally accessible systems, right? Then. Like for every one of these areas where blockchains are providing a solution, the centralized world is advancing too, right? And like we have to keep up. And if the decentralized world enters this situation where like it's like Linux or Android, where there's like 100 distributions, they don't really talk to each other, and then because of that, they just never get network effects, then like even if you're the biggest L2 and the biggest wallet, I think you're going to recognize that like this will lead to Ethereum as a whole failing, right? So it's, or potentially like it could even lead to the Ethereum community like revolting and like some like aggressive like 25-year-old man on Twitter comes up and he says like, okay, let's like burn all of the L2s and let's increase the gas limit to 1 billion, right? Like if you're an L2, like this is also a risk, right? And then there's the risk of people give up on Ethereum, right? So I think from that perspective, right, from the perspective of the bigger game, I think even the bigger players within Ethereum are aligned as well.
Thank you. One more about rollups. Did you expect all these app chains? Like during Devcon, for instance, ENS announced their own chain. Recently, a lot of applications are developing their own chains. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and so I think in app chains, like I see them existing for a few different reasons, right? So one of them is that applications don't want to have a fee market that's like subject to some like random other application, right? Like if you imagine your application, you choose some random roll up. Let's say you roll the dice and you decide, okay, you're building on like Linea, right? And then let's say the next day someone starts selling digital monkeys on Linea, and then suddenly they sell digital monkeys for like $180 million in one day, and then there's like a huge amount of MEV, and the gas price goes up to like literally 9,000, right? Like this actually happened, right? I mean, well, it happened on L1, right? But like that could happen, and then your application becomes unaffordable for reasons that are beyond your control, right? And so basically, the real problem that's being solved there basically has to do with like synchrony, right? Because like capacity is much easier to scale in real time if it's asynchronous and you just add like more parallel threads. But if it's synchronous and like every transaction directly follows every other is dependent on every previous transaction, then like you can't scale up, right? And so putting things in the same synchronous zone, even when they don't have to be, is a risk, right? And people see app chains as a solution to this, right? So this is one of the reasons, and if that's the reason, I think in the long term, people will figure out how to do parallelization inside of a single L2, which could be done in two ways, right? It could be done with like something like EIP648, like native EVM parallelization, or it could be done by having like basically many parallel EVMs and having very good protocols to do asynchronous communication between them. Like those are two paths, and I think those two paths are both valid. So that's like one reason, right? Another reason is that if you're building an application and you just want to have like lower code dependencies, right? You don't want to have a full EVM, you just want something simple, or even, let's say you have an existing application that today is not crypto and it's written in like C++, Rust, something else, and you just want to like quickly turn it into an L2, right? Then like there are tools to do that. You just like take your entire binary, you like compile it down into like MIPS or RISC-V, and then the database becomes Merkleized and like you do it all automatically, right? But then like that's not EVM, that is application specific. And I think those reasons are fine, right? So I think there definitely are some good reasons for doing application specific L2s. So I'm definitely not against the idea.
Awesome, thank you. So recently you posted an article titled Making Ethereum Alignment Legible. That was particularly interesting to me because all these recent discussions about Ethereum North Stars, the vision, and what did inspire you to write that article, and what are the challenges to have like a unique vision in a decentralized ecosystem?
Yeah, and so I think one of the challenges that we're facing as an ecosystem is like we're in Ethereum not just because we want to make things happen on a chain. We're in Ethereum because we have like particular goals that we want to see about how software works, about how society works, about like how applications that we use work. And like part of that is building them on top of the space layer, but part of that is like we want to see those same ideals also reflected at the like most important parts of the application layer as well, right? And I mean, open source is one of them, right? I think for a lot of people, crypto is an extension of open source. Open standards, so creating things that talk to each other instead of like everyone creating their little incompatible empire. Then decentralization and security, right, is something that like a lot of people are just like lazy about by default, but really, we don't want our L2s to be multi-sigs, right? And then also like being positive sum to Ethereum, positive sum to the world, so supporting public goods is like this other part. And like these are all things that we value, and these are things that often the market doesn't provide automatically, right? Now, I think the situation today is that when you're small, then there's plenty of opportunities to get grants if you're building something really valuable, right? But the problem is like when you're going from stage 1 to stage 2, right? When you're going from, let's say, where Fileverse is today to the level where Fileverse is at the level where it needs to, like, it tries to like actually compete with Google Docs for normal users, or at least it tries to, let's say, be to Google Docs what Signal is to Telegram, right? Like even like that level of relationship, right? To do that, like you cannot do that on $500,000. You need like $10 to $50 million or more. And the problem is that once you get bigger than the pool of available grants, then your incentive structure like basically switches from like pure public like funding grants to like basically pure capitalism, right? And like it's basically switches over from like one extreme where you're basically just focused on like sort of fulfilling the goals of grant makers, all the way to this other extreme where you're just focused on like basically this venture capital approach, which is maximizing the probability that you become very big and you become in a position to extract rent and dominate, right? And what we want ideally is we want something that's like more balanced, right? And the challenge I see is that like historically as an ecosystem, we have not had good like direct tools to try to encourage that. And so a lot of the time, like basically, a lot of people in the ecosystem have resorted to this like moralistic approach, right? Which is basically, if a project doesn't satisfy those values, you like publicly call it out and say, this is, you are bad. Like why don't you do, like why don't you follow more open source values? Like this is wrong, right? And the challenge with this approach is that I think it's always like, any society has to rely on that approach to like at least some extent, because I think it's never possible to fully align incentives with like formal mechanisms. But if you rely on it too much, right, then like this creates very negative effects, right? This creates like people who just decide that they've had enough of this, and they like basically it's like everyone who gets canceled gets together, and then they get into this group, and then they start fighting back, and you have polarization, or you start to like just to discourage people from participating because they're afraid, like, hey, if I do something, will I step on someone's toes, right? And like what we want is you want like more like active positive reinforcement and not just like saying good words about people, but like actually helping them with resources, helping them with adoption, helping them with community. And the other challenge, and then the third challenge is like when alignment turns into a social game, right? Basically where you say like, look, my project is one of the good ones. How do you know it's one of the good ones? Well, look, I have 5 selfies with Vitalik, and Vitalik replies to me all the time on Twitter, right? And like this is also an unhealthy game, right? And like I don't want people like trying to take selfies with me because they like wants to use that as evidence that their project is good, right? So the idea behind the post is basically, can we take the take some of these goals that we have and try to like standardize them into metrics. So the same thing as we with L2 beat, we have stage 0, stage 1, and stage 2. Do something like very similar, rules-based, very concrete for other dimensions of alignment, right? So like some other examples would be like for decentralization, one of my favorite tests is the walk-away test, right? The walk-away test basically says, if the developer of an application disappears, are you still okay, right? And like the crazy thing about this is like 50 years ago, everything passed the walk-away test, right? 50 years ago, if you buy a car and the car company disappears, you still have your car. Today, if you buy a car, the car company goes bankrupt tomorrow. Do you really have your car? Well, like who here even knows, right? Who here can confidently tell me if their car company goes bankrupt tomorrow, how long they will be able to keep using their car? Okay, no. See, like this is to me like the exact thing that the free open source software movement is like at war against, right? And has been at war against for 40 years, right? But like in order to incentivize it, we have to measure it, right? And so the walk-away test is like very intuitive, very simple way to measure, right? Or another example is like there are projects that are saying, we donate 1% to like Protocol Guild, right? Which I think is great, right? And there's projects saying, we give 1% to like retro funding, 1% to something else, right? And then that's like a clear standard. You're supporting this like dependency that, like you're supporting things that you and the entire Ethereum ecosystem depend on, and you're also helping make sure that Ethereum is resilient and doesn't just depend on the Ethereum Foundation, right? This is good, and it's also like a very clear signal, a clear commitment. It's measurable, right? So the ideal is to try to come up with 5 or 10 different things that are like it, and then just being able to measure as like the first step in the conversation of how do we actually encourage and incentivize these things.
Awesome, thank you. One last question before I leave the audience questions. Another great article that you've written recently is about wallets, what you'd like to see in wallets. Here we have a lot of builders. Maybe you can inspire them. What would you like to see in wallets?
Yeah, and so the list that I have, right, is basically, one is user experience, and to me, the frontier of user experience is, like, one big thing is cross-layer twos, right? So, like, over here, I'm going to open this up, and, I over here have a status wallet, right? And so it's going to load, and of course, the internet sucks, and at some, I'm going to type the password. I'm definitely not going to type the password in front of all your friggin' cameras, but imagine I did, right? Then, you're going to have obviously going to have a QR code here, right? And Status supports Ethereum L1, Optimism, and Arbitrum, right? So in an ideal world, if you have a wallet that only supports Base, you should still be able to pay me, right? And your wallet should automatically be able to figure out, okay, I'm on Base, he has L1, Optimism, and Arbitrum. Therefore, I'm going to use this combination of a cross-protocol and a couple of other things to automatically send the payment over, right? So that's one part of convenience. Another part of convenience, I think, that I forgot to mention in the post is all of this stuff about offline, like consumer offline, merchant online, which I think is like the more common combination, right? Payment that I think is worth doing. Then for security, right? The way that I think about like account security is basically for the longest time, our space has been stuck with these two different extremes, right? One extreme basically says, okay, you maximum self-sovereignty, not your keys, not your coins. You have your 12-word seed phrase. Write down the seed phrase on a piece of paper, only on a piece of paper, put that seed phrase inside a metal box, put the metal box to like 20 meters underground inside of another titanium box, and like it's completely secure, right? And the problem with this approach is like maybe like 5 people in the world actually care to follow it. Everyone else just says, okay, this is stupid, I give up. I'm going to put my coins on a centralized exchange, right? And the problem with centralized exchanges is, of course, that, well, sometimes, you know, the exchange you choose happens to be FTX, right? Or the exchange you choose happens to be Mt. Gox. And so, well, the better approach is like some form of like distributed trust, right? So like multi-sig wallets. So the combination that I often advocate, right, is like you have a wallet and your wallet has a spending key, which is just directly on your wallet, and you can use it to just quickly spend small amounts, right? But then also, if you want to change your spending key, so like if you lose your phone and you need to recover, or if your account gets hacked, or if you want to like make a very large transaction, then you have this multi-sig mechanism. Multi-sig mechanism says you have multiple keys. For example, 3 keys, you need 2 of them to send or spend, or 6 keys, you need 4 of them to spend. And these keys can be controlled by different things of the user's choice, right? So it can be a key on the user's device. It can be the wallet company. More recently, there's this interesting thing, which is that because of ZK Synarchs, you can take Web 2 identity, corporate or government, and you can make a wrapper and turn it into an Ethereum address. So there is a project called ZK Email where you can make an Ethereum account where you can only send transactions from that Ethereum account if you zero-knowledge prove that you control a particular email address. You can, with TLS Notary, you can do the same thing for like any Web2 social media, and there's also equivalent of this for government ID, right? So there's a project called Anon-Adhar, anonymous like ZK Snark wrapper around Adhar government ID. I think you should be able to very easily do the same thing for Quark ID. Like basically, yeah, you can even do it for passports. Passports now have chips in them, right? So the ideal in all of these cases, right, is basically that, like for a user, you can combine like different kinds of centralized and decentralized ID, and like basically use distributed trust. And this would be an approach that can protect the user both from the problems of centralized trust and from the the problems of like full self-custody, right? So this is actually like how I store most of my my coins already, right? And the interesting thing about this approach is like it works for new users and it works for existing users, right? Because for a new user, like you can even start with them with just one of one, right? Just ZK email. And then over time, you can give the user the opportunity to like add different guardians, make their account more secure. So it gives the user the full range in terms of choices. So then that's security, right? Then there's other aspects to security. So like, for example, security of DApp interfaces. Basically, we want ways for users to interact with applications where they're not just real-time downloading the application from a server, because then if the server gets hacked, like nobody realizes the server gets hacked, the user just downloads the new app immediately and they get no notification, they have no sign that anything is wrong. So a lot, in my post I talk about like a lot of different security things that I think can be improved. Then another thing is that we're doing ZK and we're doing more and more identity related things. So Quark is also part of this, right? And like my view is that I think wallets need to not just be asset wallets, but also data wallets, right? Like any application that preserves privacy, the user has to custody private data. And for private data, we actually also have to solve the exact same custody problem, right? We don't want self-custody and we don't want like full centralized custody, right? And with secret sharing, you actually can do M-event, right? It requires like different math and like, but you can do it, right? And I think someone actually should do it, right? So there's like a lot of these different things that I think like a very well done wallet can do. In terms of usability, in terms of security, in terms of functionality, definitely highly recommends that people check out the post.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Who wants to ask Vitalik? Okay.
Hi, Vitalik. I have a question related to governance. What do you think that needs to be done in order to have governance applied to real-world organizations? Let's say football clubs, governments, or NGOs, I know. Is it about top-down or bottom-up pressure? Is it about product and UX, lobby? I'm not pretending to have like a straight treasury on a governor, but maybe start experimenting with real-world organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I think, governance is like an important topic, and it's like the importance topic, right? And I think it's worth remembering that it's a topic that people, like even people far outside of our space care about, right? Like anyone in any political party has opinions on how governance should work, right? People working on social media have opinions on how governance of social media should work, right? So it's like a very big space. And I think the way I would start reasoning is I would start asking the question, like, what is the unique thing that the crypto space has to contribute? And I think to me, the answer is two things, right? One of those two things is technology, right? Basically, today we have secure but like high-cost voting, which is like regular national elections. We also have low-cost but very insecure voting. That's social media, right? With crypto technology, we can have secure and low-cost voting. And this is ZK, Macy, Snark, identity, account abstraction wallets, like all of these things put together, right? And so that's one of the tools that we have, right? And then also the other tool that we have is, as a technology, is the fact that we have a very efficient substrate for mixing financial and non-financial building blocks, right? And we can create pieces that have financial parts and that have non-financial parts that get combined in all kinds of different ways, right? So like prediction markets and like futarchy would be one good example. Quadratic funding is one good example, and so on, right? So that's one part of the answer, technology. The second part of the answer is that we just have the opportunity to do a large number of live experiments at scale, and we can actually see what works, right? Because the crypto community has lots of internal challenges. Ethereum has its own public goods that need to be funded. Ethereum, the protocol needs governance and needs high-quality discussion. Then like individual applications, they need to have like stable oracles, for example, right? They need to agree on protocol upgrades. And so we can do experiments, and then the results of those experiments, if they succeed, then we can start seeing how to apply them to more mainstream contexts outside of crypto. So I think like that's the kind of pipeline that I want to create, and like it's already starting to exist, right? There's already a lot of people in mainstream politics that are paying attention to like Ethereum quadratic funding, for example, right? And so what I would want to see is like 10 more examples like that, and then like we get to see what works, and those are the ideas that we can then like start applying to improve governance in the mainstream as well.
Thank you.
Hey, how you doing, Vitalik? What's your take on network states?
So I think the interesting thing about network states as a concept is that like lots and lots of people love them, and because the idea feels like this, like very attractive, like very science fiction-y, like this is the government of the future. But lots of people love them for different reasons, right? And it's also because they all see something different in them, right? So like for some people, like what they want is like they want to create actual new countries where they can have a lot of like legal autonomy, for example, to like do certain kinds of science that are difficult to do in the U.S. Right, and this is like one goal you can have. Other people, they basically, like you're digital nomads and they want something with like more community that's more organized, right? And that's also a good goal to have. Some people like basically want decentralized universities, right? Some people just like want stronger online communities, and like to them, Ethereum is a network state already. Other people want to take existing countries and like basically lift them up and like add some kind of internet layer that makes the existing country stronger, right? So this is like the Estonia vision from the 2010s, right? So different people have these different like mindsets toward the topic, and even if you look at some of the like actual experiments that have happened, like if you look at pop-ups as an experiment, right? Like lots of people love being inside of pop-ups, but then the question is, well, what are pop-ups the beginning stage to, right? And then to some people, the answer is a university. To some people, the answer is like actually creating a new jurisdiction. To some people, the answer is just creating a node inside of an existing city to really concentrate and like accelerate effort around one particular industry, right? So I think right now we're in that stage, right? We're in that stage where people are starting to like take the ideas and push them in different directions and do experiments in different directions. I also recently noticed that like people recently are becoming less interested in like the word network states, right? And I think this is because like people are realizing, right, that the word network state can mean 10 different things, and whatever their specific project is, their project is something more specific, right? And often, like there are great projects, and you have different projects that are great, but they're great for very, very different reasons, right? So that's where I see the space is right now. It's like in this explosion of people experimenting in different directions, and I think like some of them will succeed, some of them fail, and then we'll see where all of this is in 2 years.
Hi, Vitalik.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
What's your take on, let's say, smart contracts replacing legal papers?
So one of the, and I think there are some domains where this can work very well, right? And I think finance is one of those examples, right? Because like you see how you have smart contracts, and the smart contracts you have to call into an oracle, but otherwise like you just put in whatever code you want and it works, right? Or like for example, multisigs that are basically replacing corporate governance documents, right? A lot of the time, you can't really do that, and the reason is because the terms are like fundamentally more subjective, right? So for example, let's say I pay you $1,000 to make a website, right? Then you come back and you have a website. And then I say, well, no, I'm not paying you $1,000. I might have reasons to not pay you $1,000. For example, maybe it turns out that you just did a very terrible job, right? Maybe it turns out that you actually just plagiarized, like you literally just copied, like a Google's website, you changed around a few words and changed a few logos, and you tried to give this to me as an original work, right? And like that, and then if I used it, I would also be like violating copyright, right? Maybe, like what you gave me like has some kind of security bug in it, right? And maybe like I just think it's ugly, and maybe like I think it's ugly, but actually like you did everything in good faith, and like you made a website that according to you and even according to like most reasonable people is a fine website, but like I just think it's ugly and I'm upset and I don't want to pay you, right? So the boundary between like should I pay you or should I not pay you is like very subjective, right? And this is like that subjectivity is like exactly the thing that arbitration and courts and like all these processes are focused on resolving. And smart contracts don't do that by themselves. What smart contracts can do is they could like plug in other mechanisms that can resolve those things, right? So like, for example, we could make a contract, for example, 2 of 3 multisig between myself, you, and Kleros, right? And then the only time Kleros would even be involved is if the 2 of us actually have a dispute. In the normal case, we would not even have to like pay Kleros anything at all, right? So there, you can create contracts, right, where like you could even do things like, for example, a financial contract where like you accept Oracle values within some range, and then outside of a range, like you ask Kleros, like, hey, what's actually going on, right? So there's like, basically, yeah, the problem you can't get away with is like subjectivity, right? But sometimes you can make a lot of benefits by like adding structure to that subjectivity, and then like basically saying, well, in those cases where actually things are pretty objective, then you can just execute things directly, right? So like that's the main thing that I think is really important to keep in mind.
Yes. My question is your view, like at least in my view, in the last 2 or 3 years, like a lot of the energy of the Ethereum and the funding has been put in infrastructure and cool technologies like ZK proof. And there's not, like, my impression is that we are approaching this cycle without nothing really new in the user space and from the point of view. So you think that there is some critique to do instead regarding how to balance more the energies of the community?
So I think that we have seen interesting things in the user space like this year, right? So one, I mean, prediction markets, like they've always existed, but they've gotten much bigger. And after the success of Polymarket, we've actually started to see newer ones appear, right? So there's like Tomorrow News, there's Not Boring, there's an Omen, there's True Markets. There's like a growing list of info finance things for different use cases. So I think that's new, and like to me, that's interesting. Then decentralized social media, like the Farcaster, Lens, all of those things. The quality level has only in the last 2 years, I think, gotten to the point where like this works as a replacement for Twitter, if you want it. Then three, the ability to just use crypto for payments. For privacy, so like I use Railway regularly, and like Railway actually works. The user experience like continues to slowly improve. It's not perfect; there are still bugs, but like it keeps improving, and bugs get fixed. No, the privacy pools mechanism continues to get more advanced. A lot of things continue to get more advanced, so that's good. So there are like specific things that like we've seen even on the user side do keep improving, and that I think actually are pretty valuable. A fifth one is also ZK, right? And like we've been seeing some of these like ZK Passport and like ZK ID applications. Also Anoncast, I think, was like one of these like really fun things, and that's also based on ZK. So those things are starting to happen. I think if we want to see more of those things, I mean, okay, so this is one of my opinions. Basically, one of the problems that I think the crypto space generally has is like applications, they often get split up into two categories, where one category is like these very open, decentralized, idealistic things that are very pure, that have all of the properties that like, like maybe Richard Stallman would actually not scream at you if he sees this, right? But it's like it's really lovely theoretically, but it has a hard time getting a business model, and it makes a lot of sacrifices on UX, and so it has a hard time getting more than like 42 users, right? So this is one side. The other side is applications that say, well, screw this whole idea of principles, we're going to do what works. What works is the meme coin casino, and we're just going to say, we're a casino, screw it, casino up to 11, this is the North Star, let's just do it, right? And like we see these two extremes, right? And like to me, the first extreme is obviously useless, because like that's what the decentralization space was doing before crypto, right? And like for a long time it didn't work. And the second one is useless because, well, like what's okay, it creates big flat splashes on chain, but what's the value that it's providing, right? And to me, the thing that we want is we want an application sector that's like in the middle, right? That is both open and decentralized and positive sum to the world, and at the same time is something that has a business model and is something that actually is viable enough in terms of like being able to get usage, right? And like look, we need those applications in the middle, and I think we need an application developer community that's like really intent on finding those applications in the middle that like actually combine the best of those two sides, right? And that's something that I think historically we have not had. And one reason why we have not had it is because like Ethereum itself was not good enough to do anything, right? But now Ethereum is good enough to do many things, and so I think now is exactly that time to keep building and improving that community.
Hey,
Yeah.
I wanted to know what's your take on restaking?
I mean, generally restaking is cool. Again, I think like historically, I've had the concern that like restaking would create the incentives for like stakers to like do something wrong or to like potentially like 51% attack, or that it would like lead to consensus failures. Though I feel like, I mean, Eigenlayer and other groups like have been doing a good job of trying to mitigate that risk and like thinking hard about it. So I think that's been good. I mean, in general, like, you know, it exists and it's good for the applications that use it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Hola, hola. Bueno, thank you very much, Vitalik. A huge round of applause for Vitalik, por favor. Gracias.